You said this is this one.
These two yeah. Yes. Yes.
Before we get started today, does anyone want to have a discussion about the logical fallacies involved with mask mandate arguments? Too soon? Okay, all right. So next week, so we have the midterm exam coming up, right? So next week I have you doing some readings from a textbook. You should be able to find it online. When you're doing those readings, please be sure to take your thoughts down or take some notes on what you're reading in that textbook relative to what I would consider more current or up-to-date sort of knowledge that you're gaining here. With the readings of like very current journal articles, because the way it works a lot of times is it takes years for those journal articles that you're reading to get into textbooks. So you're sort of reading ahead of the game, and then I'm having you read that. And I kind of want to maybe even take some time next week to kind of get your thoughts on what you read there to see if you see any interesting maybe discrepancies or things that you're conflicted about. So that's part of the purpose of next week. I made an announcement. I was very generous with the first quiz. Just be sure to read the announcement that I put out about the short essays. The pop quiz is coming up. I'm going to stick to the guidelines on those. So if you miss one, just bring me a letter and we'll make accommodation. Yeah, that's for student life. You guys know that. So athletics normally sends me an email, but you might want to just check with me if you're a student athlete. Normally I get the emails, but sometimes I don't. Yeah, as far as the preparation for the midterm, I was thinking about if I should put together a sheet for you or something like that, but I'm really not trying to. I don't know that there's anything else I can really offer you. It might even take you off course a little bit. So the way I would approach studying for the midterm is, the slides are very detailed with the notes in the slides. I think those are going to be critical, and your understanding generally of the concepts that we've talked about. I'm not really not going deeper than anything we've discussed in here or that are on the slide. So I would say that would be primary. Also, there may be questions on the papers that the journal articles that you should have read. They're not going to be, you know, something that are, like I said, I'm not trying to fool you or trick you or anything like that. They're going to be questions related to the papers that, as long as you've read it and read it with the intent of comprehension, you should be fine. So so that's the way I would kind of approach it with the papers. And then you know, as far as the textbook reading goes, any questions from the textbook will most likely be contextualized within these discussions that are sort of a little different than maybe what is normally presented in this course in America, at least anyway. So are there any questions on that, on the so we have next week, and then the week after that's the midterm. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Like we take it in here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Have any sort of like, I don't know, like sheet or something you buy from the bookstore, or like go ahead and do this?
You know what? That's a good question. Let me I'll put an announcement out by the end of the week, this week. Okay. Answering that question. I'll put that out for everybody so that it's clear. Because I actually haven't thought about that in detail. I had a thought, but now I'm thinking I might want to do it a different way. So just give me that's a good question. Give me a day on that if you would. And but the format is going to be multiple choice, true, false, and then short answer. I would say, you know, two, 3 sentences, kind of a thing. But might only be just a couple words, you know, as far as that's concerned. That makes sense. I don't know if I'm going to do it with respond as lockdown and, you know, or I'm not sure. I probably will just use paper. Any other questions on that? Okay, so just so we're clear, I don't want you to miss miss a quiz and then, you know, come back, and so that's kind of the big thing there. Today we're gonna, I think what you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I hope you can see up to this point. I'm reviewing topics as we go along and then presenting them in a different context. And the reason that I'm doing that is to sort of, you know, if you know, reinforcement in learning is different than introduction to new knowledge. And so sometimes I'm trying to reinforce what you've already learned. So I hope you can appreciate that, because then we'll go into a contextual discussion on it, and then we'll have, you know, usually I have a dilemma, and that sort of brings it all together. So this is my method. So if you think you've seen some of this stuff before, it's just a sort of a different way of presenting it. Some of it's just a quick refresher while we go through this. So I had an interesting discussion with a colleague from the UK yesterday, and we were talking about the movement towards interdisciplinary studies. Is that a you know, I haven't been here for like 30 years, so is that something you hear at WVU? Yes? No, you don't hear a lot about interdisciplinary studies here? It's a really big thing around certain parts of the world, especially in Europe, the EU, and the UK. And I think there's reasons why interdisciplinary studies are becoming so important. Part of it, I think, has to do with the history of sort of the ivory tower mentality in academia in you know, around the world, but, you know, in the United States especially. But to your question. Yeah. Well, no, that's a good question. Multidisciplinary is different than interdisciplinary. In interdisciplinary studies, we're trying to understand a discipline in light of another discipline, where multi can be two different disciplines, but we're not necessarily making sense of them together. Does this make sense? Good. So I think, you know, really this is becoming a really, I would say over the past 6 years, as I've attended conferences at, you know, Durham University, Oxford, Notre Dame. I remember all those places, there's this emphasis on interdisciplinary studies. In fact, those conferences, one of the things I noticed in those conferences, they're topical, but there are people from different disciplines. I remember the last conference I was at Notre Dame a couple years ago, just 2 years ago. And there was I remember meeting a psychiatrist, several psychologists, many philosophers, a couple of theologians. There was a leadership theorist there I remember running into. So it was very, and the topic was on moral philosophy. You know, this was the conference is one of the preeminent conferences on moral philosophy that's held annually. So I think there's that push to sort of get people out of this mentality of thinking and really reading and sort of studying only their own journals. The Academy of Management is notorious for this. So you know, they just read their own journals in the Academy of Management, and then they build theories on top of management theories. And a lot of times, unfortunately, management theorists, leadership theorists, as you can see in my challenge to Joe Raylan, I don't think it's my opinion. I think it's just sort of common knowledge that there's a lack of training in I almost said multidisciplinary, in interdisciplinary studies to help make sense of some of these problems. So if you're wondering why we're in here and we're mixing different sort of disciplines together to try and make sense of this bigger problem that relates to management, leadership, and just organizations, you know, in general, marketing. We've talked about specific aspects of marketing and things like that, and finance, and you know, those things. I hope it's starting to make sense why we're looking at these things in a different way. And here's some of those reasons why you can take a look at later on. But a lot of it has to do with really just a lot of scholars have sort of isolated themselves, and they're not. And then they go to these conferences and they're realizing that they just sort of miss like a fundamental aspect of their thinking. So I'm encouraging you to branch out and, you know, outside of your discipline as best you can. So here's just something I wanted to bring up at the beginning of this lecture with, you know, sort of why is this so important about what we're talking about? This is just one of the ways that people describe. This came from another slide from the past, and it was just something that we were pointing out, like, how do we differentiate between the ethical leader and the unethical leader? Now, I'm not saying these are correct. These are perspectives or opinions about why, you know, what the difference is, I should say, right? And I think some of them are pretty straightforward. I'm sure we've run into these things. I myself have fallen into those traps. On the unethical side, you will too. I think when I was younger, when I graduated here, I went right into management. I had 44 or 46 people working for me, and I was responsible for all aspects. I was a military officer, so you're responsible for all aspects of their life, their health, welfare, even their families. It's a little, you know, overbearing in that way. But, you know, I think there were times, you know, being in the unit I was in and going to the schools I went to, you know, I kind of walked around with my chest out a little bit more than I look back now, and I think it's kind of silly. But unfortunately, sometimes you see that at very senior levels, where I was, at that time, I was very junior officer. And I sort of, one thing I learned over the years, it was a little bit of humility, you know, and so it's in the first, just, you can take a look at these and, you know, maybe it'll help you process some specifics there. But I just look at the first one. I think of myself about, you know, how arrogant I was when I was younger about certain things, and how little I really knew, but I didn't know how little I knew, you know, if you follow me. So some of these things I think are important. But the bottom one is what we're going to get into today. How these types of unethical behaviors may cause a propensity for individual moral agents in a pluralistic organization to disengage from their own moral self-sanctions. This is, by the way, this is what somebody, when I was doing a lecture on this at another university, somebody told me that it was the first time they had ever heard these things married together, this aspect of psychology and practical ethics, right? Or applied ethics, as we call it. And I'm sort of surprised at that, because as I think, as you're seeing, that they're very closely related. So let's just review the definitions of moral disengagement real quick, so that we can make sense of what we're going to talk about a little bit better. Moral disengagement, there's two definitions I found. There's like the formal one on the bottom, and then this more relaxed version on the top, if you want to call it that. Moral disengagement is a process by which an individual convinces him or herself that ethical standards that apply within a particular situation or context. You know, that's just a definition, a quote I pulled off the internet. And it's sort of a thumb down version of Bandura's definition. That's a quote from Bandura underneath. Psychosocial maneuvers. Psychosocial is just sort of what it means. It's psychologically and socially oriented maneuvers by which moral self-sanctions are selectively disengaged from inhumane conduct. And remember, we talked about what these things might be. We talked a lot about moral justification, very common way of disengaging from one's moral self-sanctions. One of the things I want you to know for the midterm, and by the way, just so I don't forget, the final exam, I don't know how it what is sort of normal here. I remember it being both ways when I was a student here, but when we do the final exam, it includes everything from the term. It's not one of those like up to the midterm and then you keep going. So it's the whole thing, right? So so we talked a lot about euphemistic labeling. I think the reason I focus on that so much these days is because I think it's one of the things that is most commonly used, and I've referred to it as clever language, or language that appeals to emotions, or something to this effect, but not. I mean, it's sort of like this whole thing that's come out like the last couple of years about like fake news. What does that mean? What does fake news mean? And like, to me, that's an aspect of euphemistic labeling. Is it actually fake news or not? Well, I guess it sort of depends on which channel you're looking at, or what web page you're on. I don't know. But that's something that you have to try to parse out in your minds. Is if someone is causing you, really, as the moral agent, to utilize these mechanisms of moral disengagement in order for you to sort of feel better about what you're doing, what choice you're making, what actions you're taking, those kind of things. So you have all the definitions for this, and we went over it. I just wanted to refresh you on it a little bit. Now think about how we're going to take this into the organizational context here, but we're going to talk about cognitive dissonance a little bit today, because this is directly related. So the disengagement of moral self-sanctions can lead to cognitive dissonance in the moral agent. Honestly, that's directly from my own research, 2016 publication. And I haven't had much pushback on that, if any. It's sort of just logical that's what happened. But there's enough research that was supportive of my research that I think that's a pretty a statement that's not argued very much these days. And it makes sense, right? Think about it this way. You're young, you're energized. Just imagine yourself, you're coming out of college, you're motivated, you have goals and aspirations, you want to meet those things. And the question really is are you in line with your own moral schema in the choices that you're making, the careers you choose, all these different aspects of life? And then fast forward, like 50 years, and your life slows down, things have changed. You're sitting on the back porch on the rocking chair like me now, and you get to, and your life slows down a little bit, and you get to just think. And this is the point in my research and other related research that shows that these decisions that are made early, even early in life, can be very detrimental later in life. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why they believe that there's a thought process that kind of goes like, you know, this may be a major factor in the reasons why the suicide rates of populations are very high around the age. Different studies show different ages, but between like 45 and 58, somewhere around there, there's a sort of a spike at that age. And you know, we used to call it like a midlife crisis kind of a stage or something like that. You know, and maybe there is some connection between that. You know, I haven't put a lot of thought into it, but if you think about it, you know, maybe that's the point in their life where people start to reflect on the life that they lived. And remember when I talked about character and Aristotle's notion of character, and that this was a lifelong, sort of process or way to think about your life. And thinking about that character aspect of it is important, I think, for you to think about now, because later on, you won't be able to go back and change it. But if you learn along the way and you fail along the way and you come to learn what choices you've made, and, you know, I think it can, you as a leader can demonstrate to other people. This is a big thing today. And, when I'm going to tell you, when I came out of school, we were still in that management mentality of, you know, if you fail, we're sort of cutting the head off, kind of a thing. And I think organizations realized they were losing a lot of really good people, I think, in that way, because sometimes the people that are failing are the people that are really kind of putting themselves out there, and so there's an adjustment in mindset and in thinking about failures. Now, some are egregious, and those aren't the ones I'm really talking about. I'm talking about failures where the intent is good, but the outcome is not so bad. It goes back to consequentialism, right? Okay, so the consequences weren't what we expected, but you as leaders, as you're going forward, if you want to keep the best people, I mean, from my experience, this is something that causes cognitive dissonance in people, in organizations in the current state. Later on, it can lead to a different form of cognitive dissonance that we'll talk about. But it's something that I think you as future managers or current managers, can, and just leaders in general, can affect from an organizational perspective. In other words, in your relationships with all the people that are in your organization. So here's a definition of cognitive dissonance. It's the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes. Does that sound familiar? This is something I pulled off of thoughts, beliefs, attitudes. Remember I said beliefs, attitudes, intentions, behaviors. Remember Fishbein and Ashton's theory of planned behavior? We talked about that spectrum. So this is where cognitive dissonance resides. It resides all the way back at the beginning of that spectrum, beliefs and attitudes. And especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitudinal change. So it not only begins at beliefs, but it ends in behaviors. And cognitive dissonance can span the spectrum. But remember where it starts, because I think that's part of the problem. We focus too much, especially in psychological oriented research and the social sciences generally, management, leadership, those kind of fields of endeavor, even applied ethics, quite frankly. We focused on behaviors. And I think the reason is that methodological aspect where empirical evidence is really important in, to be credible, right? Or it has been, at least in the past. There's a shift now to do more mixed methods type of research to sort of validate or invalidate the statistical results we get. And we talked about that when I put the outliers up on the board, and what do we do with those outliers? And so I think I've supervised 5 doctoral theses, dissertations, and I think at least 4 of the 5 yeah, 4 of the 5 were mixed methods, and it was something that I wouldn't say I required it, but if they wanted me to be their chair, that was the way I was going to do it, because I saw that this problem existed. And so I'd have them do the quantitative, and then they would follow up with a qualitative to sort of add support or make them question those quantitative results. So I think this goes that deep. Cognitive dissonance causes feelings of unease and tension, and people attempt to relieve discomfort in different ways. These include explaining things away. Sound familiar? See where they're going with this? They're going to psychological mechanisms of moral disengagement, right here in the definition of cognitive dissonance. So it wasn't really hard for me to make the connection. I just had to sort of find it. The signs of cognitive dissonance related to moral disengagement are good to just sort of take a look at. Feeling uncomfortable after making a decision, trying to justify your rationale for decisions you've made or actions you've taken. Remember, we said palliative comparison, or well, it wasn't that bad. This person did this, and that was way worse. That's kind of that palliative comparison thinking. We all do these things in our mind, right? We sort of even on the I use grand examples of warfare and Nazi trials and things like that, but you have to understand these things come down to everyday things. Your decision to attend class today or not, are you really sick or are you hungover? I don't know, but these are the things that you think are inconsequential right now. But later on, you may even suppress some of the feelings that you really have towards those decisions that you made. And you think right now, well, that's ridiculous. Well, just wait, because that's kind of what cognitive dissonance is. It's that ruminating mentality. These ideas that you just sort of keep coming back to this thing, and we've all experienced those things, that things from our past that we wish we had done different, right? Feeling embarrassed or ashamed about something you've done, experiencing guilt and regret, and all these things are leading somewhere. Here's some of the manifestations of cognitive discomfort. These are things that, as we've gone through our research, my colleagues and myself, we found these things as we, do use survey instruments and things like that to take the pulse of organizations and the individuals in the organization. These are some of the things that the discomforts that they've experienced after certain decisions they've made. I hate giving you military examples, but I just spent a lot of time in there, but I just wanted to just came to the top of my head. I was doing a course for an agency, and there was a person in the agency that had previously was an F-18 fighter pilot, and he would was landing on aircraft carriers. I didn't actually know this at the time, I wasn't a pilot, but I guess it's kind of standard procedure, or it was. I don't know if it still is, but I remember him explaining this to me, that if they were coming back to the carrier and landing on the carrier, and it was a short trip duration or something, and the instruments went wrong or whatever, they had to turn back around and land. Before they would land, they would dump their fuel into the ocean, right? There's lots of fuel in the ocean. There's leaks all over the place in the ocean. I mean, you could explain that away in a lot, but to him, the important thing is he was the moral agent. And we sat around a fireplace one night with a little group having like a little tutor session is what we call it in the UK. I don't know. And we were just all talking, and this was something that was troubling him from years prior, because he had moved on and done it, worked for another agency. And so, but that's not the point. The point was that for him, this was something that kept him up at night, that he was like dumping all this fuel into the ocean, and to some people that might seem so trite, but to him it mattered. And that's what's important. That's why we're focused. That's why I'm trying to focus on both the organization in this class and the leadership in that organization. And also, on the other hand, not forgetting those individual moral agents, right? And these are some of those discomforts that they can regret. Now, it's interesting to me as we were studying this, how closely related these manifestations are to what they used to call it post-traumatic stress disorder. Now they tend to not use the disorder part in the end of it. I think it's more of a stigma type thing. But it's interesting how closely related they are. Here's some of the, I want to go through some of the causes of cognitive dissonance that's come out in the research. Forced compliance is one of them. This is one of the ones that if you think about when we were talking about the Nuremberg trials, this was one of the sort of issues that came up in the trials. You know, in other words, the defense from a lot of the Nazis was, well, you know, I was forced to do it. You know, they're trying to make the argument that they had no choice, that they were forced into this from different societal pressures or whatever it might be. You know, these things happen not only on those grand levels, like I said, these things happen at work. And I've given you some of my own personal examples of how these things have witnessed these things happen in the workplace. So that's one way of looking at forced compliance. New information is another one. This is that, now, one of the things I want you to think about with new information is I think one of the things that's helpful in learning this and understanding this is that it can, by understanding the causes of cognitive dissonance, especially things like new information, I think it can help us from kind of taking the next step and allowing that cognitive dissonance to worsen. And we'll see in some of the research that I've been involved in on what those results can be if it goes bad. On the other hand, if you realize that you know you were learning new information, if you're humble enough to think about, you know, and self-reflect about failures that you've had in the past, things that you would do differently, and then, you know, are actively changing those things. You know, in counseling, in a lot of psychological counseling, this is one of the methods that they do. It's more of an understanding, recognition. Or that's what they say. A lot of times in therapy or psychology, things like that, you know, the first step is recognizing that there's something wrong. That, you know, recognition is the first step a lot of times. And so I think that can be helpful in this. But sometimes learning new information can make you feel like what you did in the past, you know, especially if it was harming another person, and you didn't even realize that you were harming another person in doing it, it can cause cognitive dissonance. Decisions should be obvious. People make decisions, both large and small, on a daily basis. We're faced into similar choices. And this is one of those tough things because we face these choices often, especially in corporations and capitalistic enterprises. Both options, you know, sort of like seem appealing at the time, and you feel like you have to make a choice. And sometimes those choices turn out to not be great choices. And then you can move from an understanding of that in a positive light, or you can disengage from your own moral self-sanctions, and you can try to justify it, and you can try to, you know, blame someone else, place the blame elsewhere. You remember we've had the discussion on distributive types of leadership and those kind of things. You can think of it that way. Well, you know, I was only one vote, you know, or something like that. All those different mechanisms of moral disengagement can be used to make those decisions something that is more palatable for you. I would suggest that would not be the best way to handle it. A better way to handle it would be understanding. Well, you know, what did Socrates say? Know thyself, right? So self-reflect, come to terms with what happened, and learn from it and grow. And this is something I think that you as leaders can take into your organizations, and you can bring that sort of mentality of that failure mentality isn't gonna, it can be a positive thing. Look at it as development and growth. And as you get higher in leadership and you wind up training other managers and things like that, these are some things that I hope that you'll pass on to them, because it really can affect people in the organization. I've watched it in almost every organization I've been in over the years, whether or not they have sort of a culture of, and this is one of the great things about our military, that the military in a lot of ways is a social experiment. I don't know if you've heard this in other classes, but they're usually, a lot of times they're sort of the first to try things. And then it filters down into corporate America if it works out. And I think this is one of the things that our military has done a really good job at over the past at least 10 or 15 years, is encouraging, especially officers who are supposed to be the thinkers of the newest ways of doing things, the best ways of doing things, to sort of put themselves out there and allow themselves to maybe fail sometimes, and then say, you know what, it's okay. We learned from that. We can learn from our failures, and that's what makes us better. People years ago told me how I ever got involved in selling a leader development program to the Marine Corps, because every Marine, the context behind it was every Marine's the greatest leader in the world. Why would they need leader development? And this was sort of the argument that I made to the at the time General Stewart, was basically that learning from your mistakes, your failures is what's going to keep you at the top. It's what's going to keep you the best. If you sit there and sort of stay stale, think of China, when China over history was one of those countries that at a certain point in their history they sort of walled themselves in, right? What did that do for China? Did that help China, or did it cause China to fall behind? It caused them to fall behind, right? And so it's kind of that kind of thinking, I suppose, that you can take into the organization. So what are some of the influences of cognitive dissonance? Well, first of all, we have the degree of dissonance. People experience dissonance in different ways, depending on different factors, including how highly they value a particular belief, and the degree to which their beliefs are inconsistent. Another factor is the overall strength of the dissonance can also be influenced by factors such as cognitions that are more personal, things that you feel are more personal to you as a moral agent. Beliefs about yourself, how you feel about yourself. A lot of times, and I won't get into self-efficacy and those kind of things, but a lot of discussions that I've been involved in about this particular aspect of cognitive dissonance revolve around two things really: self-esteem and self-efficacy, and they're all related to Bandura's work, actually, because he comes from that part of he comes from the field of developmental psychology, and so that's involved in a lot of his work. And then there's also the number factor. There's the number of dissonant beliefs. The more dissonant, clashing thoughts you have, the greater strength of the dissonance. Which that's just sort of that compounding principle. So moral disengagement increases the propensity for cognitive dissonance and post-traumatic stress. This is new. I doubt you will find this in your textbooks yet. It'll get there. But this is something that we've linked together over just the past several years. And it sort of goes like this. Post-traumatic stress, or PTSD, is traditionally thought of as a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event such as a natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist act, war, combat, rape, or have been threatened by death, sexual violence, or serious injury. When we went through our study a few years ago, my 2016 research study was focused on suicide in combat veterans. But what came out of the study was very interesting. We were finding connections to everything from ER doctors to police officers, to people that worked in certain aspects of the corporate sector, people that had sexual trauma when they were young. I'm just off the top of my head, I'm just thinking of some of the connections, but all these things were connected. While we focus on, the reason I highlighted traumatic event there is we also realize that what is a traumatic event for one person may not be very traumatic to another person. Some people, this is what I said, we each have our own moral schemas. All those things are brought into the pluralistic organization. And so what is right for one person isn't going to be right for the other person in some cases. We've recognized that as we've gone through some dilemmas in this class. And the extent of the trauma related to a certain event is very hard to predict in the individual because it has to do with their fundamental beliefs, their conscience, if you will. And that's a very difficult thing to study, especially empirically, right? Because even if we try to, even if I give you all a survey and I try to parse out what you really believe, there are so many. I was just actually having a discussion about writing over here today about this, about survey instruments and how people have, you've done this, you have a tendency to answer sometimes how you think the organization that's giving you, a lot of times it's an organization like a company or something that's giving you a survey to do. A lot of times we tend to answer even without even knowing it, not what we really believe, but more of what we believe someone else wants to hear. Does this make sense? And so this is part of the problem with studying, especially things all the way at the far end of the belief spectrum of Fishbein and Ashton's theory of planned behavior, as opposed to behaviors which are more observable, right? And so that, I think that's one of the reasons why the research has tended to focus on that end, because it seems more empirical. There's more problems trying to discuss beliefs, down in that philosophical side of the house. So that's why I added that comment at the end there, that this definition, this is more of a traditional definition that's above, but it's being expanded to think of trauma more of a subjective experience as opposed to categorical experiences. Like I gave you some of those examples there, combat, being involved in a serious accident. For example, a lot of people have trauma from like a car accident or something that they had. One of the things we found was police officers that are state troopers. They wind up witnessing a lot of accidents, terrible accidents on the highway that we just sort of drive by and take a look and say, "Ooh, that looks bad," but they're there. They're there on the ground. An EMS same way. And they're going in and they're, some of those accidents are terrible. And but we realized that the level of distress isn't directly correlated with the what I want to say, the specific incident itself. It's a relationship between that decision that you make, whether it be in the corporate sector or your personal life or whatever, that decision that you make and what it means to you in a subjective sense, because we were sort of missing the correlation between the act and the beliefs. And this is sort of one of the things we're trying to do in this class, is tie these things together. So post-traumatic stress can cause a greater propensity for self-harm. This is what the my 2016 study and then follow-on research has shown. And there's a couple ways that we went about doing this. We sort of did an empirical investigation. We followed up with some qualitative investigations, and then we really used just logical argument and other research that supported our claims to develop this. And I'm going to kind of show you the general construct that we developed related to this in a minute. But you know, self-harm can come in a lot of forms. Hurting oneself as a way of dealing with very difficult feelings, painful memories, or overwhelming situations and experiences. That aspect of hurting oneself can come in many different ways. It can. I was reading a paper one time about, I don't want to offend anyone, but this is a paper I was reading. It was about tattoos. And it was about why have tattoos become so prominent? Well, there were several reasons. Some of them were sort of benign in a way, where it's a cultural, you know, sort of a cultural thing. But one of the things that they pointed out in the study is for some individuals, both the pain of experiencing the tattoo itself and I can't remember how they phrased it, but it had something to do with the aspect of how it changed the way they felt about themselves. That it was viewed in some cases as a self-destructive behavior. And so this is where I say it's very subjective. To some people, getting a tattoo means nothing. In fact, I probably would have one if I hadn't been an intelligence officer. I probably would have got my jump wings tattooed on my back or something, like a lot of paratroopers do. But I was intel, so we were forbidden to have any identifiable marks, right? And that's not always the case. So if any of you are interested in going to intel, don't think that's a barrier. That was just a, you know, it's sort of like once you were in, they certainly didn't want you to add anything else, you know, sort of just a protective measure for us. But that's just one example of sort of where someone could think of like self-harm. Oh, it's just, you know, cutting, it's just cutting, or, you know, all these different things that psychologists are dealing with these days. What I'm trying to say is it can be a lot broader than that. Self-harm can come off as binge drinking, or just drinking too much in general, right? That can be self-harm. So, I mean, self-harm can be taking pills or opioids, or it can be using drugs to remove yourself from, you know, I mean, you know, from, you know, I was a student here. You know, it was very stressful here for me at times, as I'm sure it is for you. You know, so you just, you know, you do these things to relieve the stress, and then but how do you feel the next day besides the hangover or whatever it might be? You know, it's like sometimes you don't feel so good about yourself, you know. So it's kind of that kind of thinking. I think that, you know, for me, you know, thinking back then, well, I was young and stupid, and you know, sometimes maybe I was just doing things that just try and get through. And you know what? At the end, it worked out for me. So do I have all these thoughts about that? You know, like ruminations. Ruminating is what we call it in psychology. You know, no, I don't. You know, I look at it as growth. See, so I've turned that into a positive thing. Okay, this is something I did. You know, would I do it that way again, knowing what I know now? Probably not. But you know. So do you see the different ways of thinking about this? You can sort of view it in a positive way. And what the reason I bring this up here is because you are, as leaders, are going to have influence over other people. It might be authority influence, or it might be reverent influence. It could be a mentoring relationship or things like that. And so that's why these discussions are so important, because at the end of the day, no matter how mechanistic the organization or corporation is, you're still dealing with people at the end of the day. And I think that's the thing that a lot of companies are trying to get back to, but it's almost, I think a lot of executives feel like they're rowing upstream these days, because things like social media is one of the things that comes out when I do my consulting work a lot of times, and how it's affecting people in the organization, and how much, you know, it's affecting relationships between people, policies that the organizations are struggling with. So I think there's things with technology even that are not making this problem better. They're making it even more difficult for managers and leaders in organizations. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to discuss this. People often describe self-harm to express something that's hard to put into words, turn invisible thoughts or feelings into something visible, change emotional pain into physical pain. That's very common. You can kind of read down that list, and the sense of self, of being in control, having something in life that they can rely on. That a lot of times that comes down to relationships, and I don't mean personal like relationships. I mean like work relationships. It can come down to that too. Just the nature of the work that I did for a lot of my life was they called it the dark side for a reason. I think one of those reasons is because it's sort of like that's what you want. You want to be able to trust somebody, but at the same time, you don't feel that you could trust anybody. That's just sort of the nature of being an Intel community, and it kind of eats away at you. I think over time, for a lot of people, I know it did for me. And I guess that's one of the reasons they call it like going to the dark side. It's not literally going off the grid, although that's a part of it. But I think it's something a little deeper than that. So take a look at those, and I think those might help you understand, the extent of self-harm. It's not always something that you can just witness or something like that. You have to really, get to know people in your organization. And I encourage you, if you want to be a good leader, as best you can, that interpersonal relationship can be really, really influential in helping people that you're leading deal with issues in their life, just even from a thing like having that kind of trust that you're not going to throw them under the bus, if they tell you something. So we've taken several weeks to really come to this important aspect of what we're dealing with. And what our research has shown is that moral disengagement, which we've talked about many different ways in which that can occur in all organizational contexts, in our daily lives. Sometimes it means more to us and someone else because it's subjective. Sometimes it means less. But the point here is that the disengagement of your own moral self-sanctions can lead to a higher propensity. This is the way we describe it in our research. A higher propensity for cognitive dissonance. We didn't even have to do research on the relationship between cognitive dissonance and self-harm. That had already been done. So all we did is put the pieces of the puzzle together for that last part. Cognitive dissonance can lead to self-harm. And then we did an empirical study and showed that self-harm can lead to, it's not just, even cutting or something like that. It can lead up to and including the ultimate self-harm, as we called it in one of our papers, I think, which is suicide, right? So it's interesting when I go, I usually start off with something like that when I go to somewhere to do a lecture or something like that, because it gets people's attention. People go, a lot of times I'll speak in forums that have to do with business or leadership or something to this effect. And they think they're going to, I don't know what they think they're going to get at this. But when we start talking about when I start bringing up this aspect of self-harm up to and including suicide, and then show them the empirical evidence of studies that have been done on this, it really starts to get a lot of attention. People start to think about it differently, because we're not talking even about a specific profession. Yes, we have related those things to certain professions that it's just more obvious, but what we realize is it can happen in almost any context. It can happen with a stay-at-home dad, or stay-at-home mom, or whatever it might be. I mean, the context isn't what we were so focused on the context, we missed the fundamental beliefs of the individual that were leading to the disengagement of moral self-sanctions, which then leaded to cognitive dissonance, which then leaded to self-harm. See, we missed the beginning part. And that was the part that I think we have really focused on. You want to help me? Let's take this and let's do a little. I forgot to set this up. I'm sorry.
There's only one girl.
No, yeah, okay, that's true.
It's fine.
So let me put this up here and
In a conversation with your technical supervisor, you are asked if the increase in the cash amount was enough. You, however, have not seen any additional money. You realize your coworker has been pocketing the additional money. Do you tell your advisor you have neither asked for nor received any additional petty cash and that you've suspected your coworker is pocketing the money? Tell your coworker you're suspicious and give them a chance to pay them money back, or say nothing and just wait to see what happens.
so now we're doing a dilemma here. So you can only pick one of the three. I don't want you to talk your way out of the dilemma. That's not the point. Okay, so what I want you to try and do is, first of all, I'm just going to give you a second to think, and then I'm going to poll the class, and then I want to hear some reasoning about why someone might pick one of those things. Okay. So how many of you would tell your supervisor you have neither asked for nor received any additional petty cash and that you suspect your coworker is pocketing the money? How many would do that? Many, a lot. Okay, good. How many would tell your coworker you're suspicious and give them a chance to pay back the money? How many would do that? Good. Good bunch. How many would say nothing and just see what happens? Good, good. That's good. That's a brave answer. I like that. Okay, so let's get some reasoning. Now, what I want you to try and do is, as you're offering your reason, try to tie it to something that we've discussed, one of the constructs, whether it be moral disengagement, whether it be three rival versions of moral inquiry, that sort of that genealogical view, the encyclopedic view, or the view of tradition that McIntyre talks about, or whether it might be virtue ethics, deontology, or consequentialism. Okay. So let's start with the minority. Say nothing and just see what happens. In this case, I would like to offer a reason, some reasoning behind that line of thinking.
I don't know like specifically like which one I would use, but I mean just like explaining my like thought behind it is like all that petty cash is at the office like before it goes to the bank. So the manager sees it, etc. Everybody sees it. So like whenever somebody asks for how much money's in the petty cash account and it's zero, like that's not on you. Like everyone saw the cash leave in your coworker's hands and go to the bank with them. So I would say like it's just above my pay grade is what I would say.
So are you saying that you would need more evidence?
Yeah, before I would just like say something, because I'd say the reason I wouldn't say the second one, like going to your coworker specifically, would be consequentialism. Just like if they're like, why would you say I'm doing that and like get aggressive with you? Like that could cause them to like point the finger at you and just cause like more problems at work within.
The only thing I would say there is that that's a little bit of a map. Look at it. When we're doing a dilemma, we don't want to change the conditions of the dilemma, right, in order to find a way out. But I like the thinking because that's what you're trying to do. That's where you want to go. And in this case, we say there, you realize, your coworker can talk to you. So then the question is, okay, he's coming knocking the door, let's change the contract. The first case is to kind of outcome that the lack of information. That's good recognition. On the other hand, if we stick to the dilemma as it's written, that becomes more problematic, right? Everybody understands that's good. That's good. Very good. Thank you. Okay, let's so the majority was the top one. But there was a lot of people that had some thoughts on tell your coworker you're suspicious and give them a chance to pay back the money. Who would like to offer some reasoning behind that was leaning towards that would like to offer some reasoning behind tell your coworker so you go to your coworker and you're going to confront them on it. Who would like to offer some thoughts on that?
You were close.
What I would say is like, I wouldn't really necessarily know which morality to use to argue this, but I think that people are redeemable in some way. I don't think you are your past. I think you can learn from your past and be different. I think like if you give them a chance to redeem themselves and then come clean and say, yeah, I stole it, like I'm gonna find a way to give it back, or I'll give it back to my boss or something, then you're giving them that chance, and then they can change in future, and then there isn't that huge consequence of them losing their job or something. You're actually looking out for your friend, your coworker.
Yeah, so there's a good example of consequences. This could be something that becomes, as we were saying earlier, becomes a positive thing as we go moving forward. Right? Good. You have a response?
Yeah. I would just say, like, I don't think that that's the right thing to do. I get you have their best interest at heart, but like they clearly in that situation, like, did not have your best interest at heart because you're in charge of it.
So are you saying that you would not tell your coworker?
I would not confront my coworker. I would tell my supervisor.
Okay, good.
Because I think that in this situation, like, they can definitely handle it in a better way. And if they need to lose their job, then that's what needs to happen. That's, probably what's written in the handbook or whatever. But I think just based on past experiences with myself, when you try to handle things that are like higher up and they have a lot more to do with yeah, exactly. Above my pay grade. I don't want to get in trouble for if things get out of hand. I want to handle it like the most responsible way and like through the correct process and whatever. Yeah, I don't know that one.
I think the way she was describing it was more of a deontological duty type of thing. She may have mixed both, but what I heard was she mentioned the handbook, right? And sort of there's just rules, and it's kind of like when we had that other dilemma. Somebody said you got to do it. Oh, when we're talking about Parker, somebody said sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And so in this case, that was that deontological thing. You got to do what you got to do, and there's rules, and there's the rule book, and probably in the rule book, that's what it tells you to do is go. So you could be struggling with that aspect too. Somebody had a hand up over here. There, right there. Which one are you supporting?
So the first one.
First, okay. You're gonna tell your supervisor.
Yeah. So like I was thinking more of a way like whenever I get out of college, I want to own my own business. So I was thinking like as like the supervisor almost like if something like that happened, I would want to know who was doing it basically, not just like to yell at them or anything, just see why they were doing something like that. And then like say for some reason they have some like financial hardship in their family or something like that, see like what's going on with my employees, be like, hey, there's some way I can help you out. Is there something going on in your life that I don't know about? And just kind of be in more connection with them.
So in this case, so you're looking at yourself as the supervisor?
Yeah.
So you're removing this barrier that was brought up early. Okay, good. That's a good thing. I mean, there you're kind of thinking of consequences of possibly helping the person, it sounds like, but perhaps, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but perhaps there is more of a character issue there. And as a business owner and sort of the top of the food chain, you need to understand what that is. That's kind of the point you're making?
Yeah.
Good. That's good.
I feel like also like based off him saying that like he wants to know like what's going on in case they have like financial issues. I feel like it's also moral disengagement from the worker maybe because you don't know what's going on.
Okay, which one are you leaning?
I'm going off of what he said, the first one,
Okay.
where
So
he
that-
said that he wants to like talk to the worker and see if they have financial problems. So I feel like the worker might have been going through moral disengagement when they didn't actually want to take the money because like their morals are like, oh, well, I probably shouldn't steal, but because you never know what's actually going on in someone's life.
Yeah, that's interesting. That goes back to kind of what I was alluding to, where a lot of companies are moving in that direction because there are these other pressures, right? That sometimes we don't see, and sometimes it just ask somebody for something that I use the word petty cash for a reason, right? And I use it for a couple reasons too. Petty cash could also be a way of euphemistically labeling an action, right? As well, it's just petty cash. It's not like profit or something like this, right? Did you have a you're a philosopher in the making. You're rebuttaling yourself. I do this all the time.
The whole pay grade talk would be like, if my pay grade isn't good enough, like me telling my supervisor would like boost my pay grade for this promotion or something like that.
So there's a different form of consequentialist thinking. Maybe the consequences by doing that could work out for you, right? Because maybe it could be looked at as your supervisor as an act of integrity, right? Even though you might be friends. Please.
Isn't that egoism? Like, because you're only doing it to benefit yourself. So you're only thinking about what's going to benefit you. You're not thinking about how that person's might get fired or how that person might get in trouble.
What do you say? Does someone have a response to that? Yes.
If you go to your coworker, things could get out of hand and then you can get in trouble. You're the one, it says right in the first sentence, you're in charge of the petty cash. So if you don't know what's going on with it, you can get fired for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you go to your supervisor, it's egoism because you're only thinking about yourself.
But you're not like doing it to harm the other person.
But egoism, you only think about yourself. You don't think about your best interest.
So this goes back to the point of this subjectivism that we talked about. So we don't. So this is a good point. The point you're bringing up is we don't know, right? We don't know if the person is what the motivation of the person is, which is one of the aspects of this dilemma and why I put this dilemma in this part, is because sometimes by not understanding the motivation, or you brought it up in a different way, the what did you say it was, the what was it? Yeah, that the fact that they may be disengaging from their own moral self-sanctions and not even really be aware of it. Then it comes down to, well, is that an act of is that something that would fall under integrity? Is it egoism? Is it, or psychological egoism is what I assume you're alluding to there, right? Is it, what is that motivation? And I guess that's the
that's the thing that is becoming a new aspect of competitiveness in organizations. Because if we can figure some of those things out, what those motivations might be, then we can maybe make a better decision on what to do. You know, the question is, I've laid it out in a way, it's like, well, you're trapped into three answers here, right? And I do that for a reason, because what you're realizing is you could sort of want to mix all three of those together if you want to have a really good answer, maybe. I don't know. Maybe not the third one so much, but the first two were certainly bouncing back and forth here, right? We're not really sure. It's almost like we want to, I use the word confront for a reason. But you could use a different euphemism in your own mind to say, maybe if I would have said, you want to approach the person and go, you know, tell them you want to have coffee with them and try and make it like a low key, you know, let's just see what's going on kind of it. Maybe more of you would have been more comfortable with it, with taking the stance of the second one up there, if I would have put it in that way. But many of you didn't, right? You fell in the first one. And so that's what I'm trying to show you here, is sometimes even language will persuade us like that, because I use the word confront, which has certain connotations, but I could have also used the word approach, right? Which would have a little bit of a different connotation. And maybe more of you would have been persuaded to approach the person as opposed to confronting the person, right? But at the end of the day, when we're dealing with this relational aspect in organizations, we just sometimes, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important. And everybody says this, but they don't realize how hard it is to do, I think, a lot of times when they're saying it. It's easier to say the higher you get when you have more and more managers under you, because you just expect them to do it. But, you know, there's this thing about knowing your people, you know, knowing about them, who they are, so that you can try to determine their motivation. You know, is this person, they just have a big ego? Are they going to do whatever it takes? You know, maybe this person is nervous about this person under them, that they're outperforming them in other ways. And then this could lead to this aspect of psychological egoism, right? And they could want to sort of throw that person under the bus. We don't know, is the point. And I think the reason that this dilemma should resonate with you as future leaders and managers and business owners, I think that it's an aspect that is so often talked about, in my experience at least, and I think many of my colleagues that have climbed the ladders of management in large firms and small firms as well, they struggle with this aspect of getting to know their people, because relationships are hard, and they're hard at work sometimes. There's so many barriers with relationships at work, and it's almost like our society keeps putting more and more of them up, and so we distance ourselves more and more from each other. And to some of us that are studying this line of work, this is becoming concerning to us. So think on this dilemma, think on these things, think about how this is going to translate into your leadership journey, your journey as you go and build new businesses, and have all these people in these relationships that are involved, because it's not always just the people you work for. A lot of times we're working in partnerships and things these days. So it's very difficult to try to figure out what these motivations are, but they're important because they are subjective. Next week, we'll discuss this in more of the corporate context. Please read the section before you come to class that I have in the textbook. It's online, it's free. Read that and think about what we've discussed in the context of what your textbook has to say. And I would like to start the next class off with hearing some of your thoughts about that context and some of the things that you see. Have a great weekend.